Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam from the unceded lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation. It's another gorgeous night here in the Long Beach. The sun's still up, it's warm, and tomorrow the forecast is going to be a hot one for the week and weekend ahead. So please join the conversation. Text us in the studio on 0493 213 831. We'd love to have you with us. My conversation partner this evening is Ann Shoebridge, an accomplished Australian milliner and contemporary art professional. She holds a Bachelor of Arts with honours in Fine Arts from the University of Melbourne and has started millinery under Louise McDonald. With over 20 years of experience, Shoebridge established her eponymous millinery label in Melbourne in 2003. Her distinctive designs have gained national and international recognition, with her work featured in prestigious publications such as Vogue Japan, Vogue France, and Harper's Bazaar Australia. Shoebridge's creations are stocked by major Australian retailers including Myer and David Jones. She has also collaborated with leading designers and stylists to create bespoke headwear for editorial shoots, advertising campaigns, and celebrity events. Her talent has been recognised through various accolades, including being a finalist at the Hat Designers of the Year in Paris in 2013, selected by Master Milliner Stephen Jones, OBE. Shoebridge's work is also represented at the National Gallery of Victoria's collection. Parallel to her millinery career, Anne has also nearly 30 years of experience in the contemporary art sector. She has also worked with prominent institutions such as the Melbourne Art Fair, National Gallery of Victoria, and Artspace Sydney. Currently, she's employed at the Mossman Art Gallery, where she manages development and philanthropy. Anne's dual expertise in millinery and contemporary art has allowed her to create unique, narrative-driven collections. Her background in fine arts significantly influences her approach to design, resulting in headwear that brings the gap between fashion and art together. Welcome to the program, Anne.
Thanks for having me, Ilana.
So good to have you on. Now, listeners who are also joining us live on YouTube, hello there to everyone at home. We'll see that I'm alone in the studio tonight and you're here on the laptop in front of me and dialing in on the phone line tonight. Where are you dialing in from?
I'm dialing in from Borragagal and Camaragal land, and that's otherwise known as Mossman in Sydney, the glorious Sydney Harbour.
Glorious Sydney Harbour, but you studied in Melbourne. I want to know how you got there. I want to know how the journey to Sydney began.
Well, the one good thing about a divorce was the ex-husband, and I ended up in Sydney. So, yeah, I was brought up in Western Victoria, the Western District, but spent most of my time in Melbourne and came to Sydney 12 years ago, and have settled here. Yeah, I still miss Melbourne and the wonderful weather you have.
We're envious of the weather and the beaches in Sydney as well. I want to ask, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
Okay, that's interesting. So when I was really little, I was born in Portland, on the coast, and then was in Hamilton when I was really young. So I was around a lot of kind of domestic environments. I remember my grandfather's wool shed. It's always intriguing, the smell and the dark and the heat, and my grandmother's kitchen. But one memory which I was really fortunate to have was when I was really little. My parents took me traveling with them and my grandparents around Europe for 3 months in a van. And I would say my first really prominent memory is of Ghiberti's doors in Florence, which on the doors of the Duomo in Florence. And I think because I was, 3 or 4, people, you wonder when your first memory is, but I do remember this blazing gold, but it was like the relief characters from I think it was the Old Testament or the New Testament, but they were at my height and kind of looming out at me and just looking skywards to this giant door.
Wow.
That it's not an internal space, but it's an important feature of an architectural space. Yeah.
That architectural style was also very much intended to create that sense of awe and to impact you.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on that idea though, that the frieze, the relief was at your height, and that's rare.
It
That's a
would,
really rare experience.
yeah, and also because it was the scale of, well, it's a little smaller than a child, but it was sort of, they were like small uh humans coming out at me, leering out at me, and yeah, it was really impactful. Um, but it's interesting, when you say about the architecture of that time. I mean, when I was older, when I was thinking about architecture, the spaces that the space that really, really overwhelmed me was the Vatican in Rome. And I think it was because it was the largest internal cavity or space I'd ever been in. Yeah, and they were, as you say, designed to create a sense of awe and otherworldliness.
Was it the ceilings of the Sistine Chapel perhaps that captivated you, or for me some of these memories of the scale of St. Paul's Basilica in Rome that's part of the Vatican?
It was simply this open, internal, enormous space. Yeah, no, I saw the Sistine ceiling, and that's amazing. But it was really walking in. The Pantheon is a little like that too, but slightly smaller. But how they could magic up such a large interior.
That immense
Yeah.
void that makes you feel so tiny.
Yeah, that's it. And I know there's big voids in buildings today, but they're not the same, I don't think. Yeah.
No, they're definitely not. They're definitely much harder for us to justify.
Yeah. Because those spaces, from that period were, as thinking of higher beings, and enveloping you with the decorative elements as well. So a sense of warmth, even though it was so cavernous.
Was that trip inspiring for you in terms of wanting to be interested in art as a child?
I definitely think it formed a real interest, or it sparked an interest. My parents weren't in art, but they always had a really healthy appreciation of it, and my grandparents. And when I was little, growing up in Hamilton in Western Victoria, I do remember going to the Hamilton Art Gallery, but regularly with Mum, and there was a room with an early bequest of works. They were quite small, and I looked them up, but it's the Paul Sandby. I think he was an artist in 1760, and that was gifted to the gallery or acquired. And they were small topographical drawings and drawings of, I guess, yeah, even Roman architecture and that. And I think it spirited me away from daily life, which wasn't so bad. I had a great childhood. But my parents encouraging that, yeah, sparked an interest.
Do you remember what much of the Western District was like at the time?
I do. It was really happy. It was open. It was free. You could roam around. There was a lot of outdoors time, especially when we visited my grandparents' farm. But then I'd have my other maternal grandparents lived in Melbourne, and so I'd equally love. I was itching to get to the city. Like it was, you drive and arrive at night after a 3-hour drive, and the lights flashing past you, and it was just, yeah, it seemed so fabulous. I think that also drove me to try to get to university in Melbourne.
To make it to the big smoke.
To make it to the big smoke. Yeah.
Why fine art?
I think because of that initial love. When I was young, I used to draw a lot. Mum had a lot of those patterns, those Berta patterns or Vogue patterns or wherever they were, with the women looking fabulous on the front. And I just remember always just looking through them going, wow, this is amazing. We didn't have magazines. It wasn't really around. There wasn't really TV, because I think there might have been a black and white ABC. That was it. And so I remember drawing endlessly figures of women wearing platform shoes, colourful A-line dresses, massive hair, and massive eyelashes, which are very fashionable today. So I think I drew thousands of drag queens back in the day.
Did they have
So
hats
yeah,
on?
there was an innate love of fashion somewhere.
Yeah, these fashion sketches, which you still do today by having a look on your Instagram. There's a lot of
Yeah, it's
drawings
funny
and
because I drew a lot then. Then I had a very long gap. I realized I did used to doodle and draw all the way through my life, and then it was more in recent years that I picked up the brush again and thought, wow, I can do this. And it's like all this quiet training was going on in the background without realizing. It's not formal training, but I think my eye was observant all along.
That's interesting. That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Your work is primarily works on paper at the moment in terms of your visual practice and drawing. How did you come to that style, that medium?
Well, I was sketching fashion here and there, but it was really in lockdown, like many other people, where I pivoted. Um, we were stood down from work, as many people were, and sent home. And, you know, there was financial worry over everybody. And I drew I painted some pets for some friends for fun. And my sister said, you know, Anne, why don't you put them on Facebook and just put them out there for $40?
Yeah.
And so I put them on Facebook and I got 80 orders.
Wow.
And for pets, not fashion. And so I spent weeks and weeks and weeks painting everybody's favorite household friend during lockdown.
That's
So
incredible.
that's where it really began. It's ongoing now. It's slowed down, but I've done, I don't know, 200 or 250 pets, and then I thought I'd you know, break away from the pets and give the fashion illustrations a go, and I've really enjoyed that. I think the looseness of my wrist and with doing those pets has really assisted in the fashion illustrations.
Did you ever imagine yourself that you'd been drawing pets and pet portraits?
But no, I didn't at all. And in fact, a colleague was saying, I think you were mentioned on the radio on ABC the other night. And I went, oh, what for? Because I thought I knew you were coming up, and they said they mentioned pet portraits, which is completely left field.
Well, you never know what people will be receptive to. You never know what you can create and just put out there into the universe, and people will pick up and love and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot to begin with. You know, a furry being with cute eyes and a button nose. What's not to love? So yeah.
We'll try share some
great.
of your favorites with listeners on a follow-up post on Instagram.
Okay.
How did you get into millinery?
Millinery was not so abrupt like the pet experiment. I got into millinery because my career has been in art after finishing university, and I was working at Melbourne Art Fair, which was an amazing role and opportunity. And but the arts is notoriously known for, you know, not huge salaries. You know, so I thought, how can I spin and you know, make a little bit extra to help me along? And I've always liked hats. I don't necessarily wear lots of hats myself, but I think it's more the architectural form and the sculpture of it. So I found early drawings I'd done when I was a kid of hats, and I think it came from that. And I thought I'd create a collection and put it together. And I was really fortunate because on the board of Melbourne Art Fair was a wonderful woman called Gabrielle Pizzi, who was a gallerist working with Indigenous artists in Melbourne. And she had a great eye. She was also a wonderful fashionista. And she recommended representing the collection to Christine Barrow in Flinders Lane in Melbourne, which is Christine on Collins now. And she supported my collections and bought the first collections. And that really motivated me to get going and kick it off and do a collection seasonally. Yeah. So that's where it began.
That's amazing.
And then it sort of grew and I got customers and people wanted to buy them. Yeah.
And you were Stockton Meyer and David Jones. And...
Yeah. That was a lot later, probably after I moved to Sydney, really. But yeah, I had supplies and did collaborations with different designers for Ilana Hill and Olga Berg. I've done some designing, the more commercial brand. Yeah.
What do you look for in the form of a hat when you're designing? What piques your interest?
I try to look for something sculptural and balanced. It depends because I've designed things that are more bespoke and bolder, but then designing for streamlining to be more commercial, you have to think in a different way. You have to think about practicalities, scale, materials. Yeah, but it's the way structures can flatter a face or frame a face is what I'm looking at, really. Yeah.
Sometimes they could be like scaled down buildings almost in the same.
They're definitely scaled down buildings. Actually, when I watch grand designs and, then there's these major errors of like 1 millimeter, which means, I don't know, the roof can't go on or windows can't go in. I always kind of feel a little bit of inner joy that, the little problems sometimes structurally I have with hats and I feel really bad about if it's slow with a client or something. You think it's all just scaled up, like these issues that happen with proportions and measurements. Yeah.
It validates
so they are.
you.
They're mini buildings, but you don't have to deal with as many people.
That's a really interesting point though, because I think there's so many similarities between creative processes. There's so much overlap in the creative process when you're looking for a form or you're looking for a design solution, and it has to be beautiful, but it also has to be structural and it has to hold up and it has to sit well, and you have to want to keep it. And perhaps people were looking, or the listeners were perhaps looking at the program for this week and this week's conversation thinking, where has this show gone in 72 weeks on the air and 72 broadcasts that we're discussing millinery? But it's these fantastic overlaps in design process that I think is amazing to come into your world a bit closer. Please go on.
It's nice to share the different approaches, but as you say, realize there is so much crossover, and in creative practice, you're essentially going through the same motions from imagination to paper to construction and sending it to the universe.
So do you make maquettes or prototypes as part of your process?
No, I don't. I think I haven't been formally trained, and I think if you were, that's what you do. I do a lot of sketches and structural sketches. For some designs, yes, I definitely do mock-ups and patterns. I've done knitted headwear, so my grandmother and mother's knitting skills came into play, so I had to create the pattern and do the numbers and how you're going to construct it and make a corner meet. So, and I did do, I do. So sometimes I do maquettes,
My mind is blown that you're not formally trained. That gives him pause. So
Well,
successful. Your hats are so sought after. That's
that's
what advice do
well,
you have for the next
uh,
generation?
well, it's not brain surgery, so that's my number one uh, rule. I think again, it was an observant eye. So I began actually uh, when I did a short course years ago when I was working at National Gallery at Swinburne University, or TAFE it was, in Melbourne in the 1990s, late 1990s. And Louise McDonald, who's a really talented and respected milliner, was running it. So I really credit her with teaching me some groundwork skills. And Louise had done a lot of headwear in films, Pride and Prejudice, House of Eliot, and I loved those. So it was I was fortunate to do some training with her, and then most of the time has been every museum I go to, I'll really go and hunt down the millinery collection. I've done that overseas as well. And I think it was just looking at the construction and trying to replicate that and take ideas that I thought would work with my designs. Yeah. So, for instance, when I was in New York, I made an appointment with the Museum of Modern Art, and it was rigorous. You have to apply to go, and you had to choose 6 hats out of a collection of thousands.
Whoa, how do you pick?
When you get online and look at these institutions' collections online, it's mind blowing. So I chose 6 hats. I think there are Halston ones and Louis Dash or Daché, a French milliner. And so I got to handle them in white gloves and really look at the technique and the spirit of that milliner and the hat. So I've learned a lot along the way doing that.
I want to pick up on your recurring point about the observant eye and the creative visual eye. Can that be trained? Do you think that's something innate or something you're born with?
That's a difficult question. I think there's an element of training in that, but I do think there is an innate eye. Yeah. That can look, an untrained eye can be refined. Yeah. That's a good question. I feel like in me it comes from within, like, yeah.
Yeah, that your own creative and aesthetic sensibility and your own keen observation guides you. Can that, I guess a similar question about aesthetic sensibilities and that taste, have you ever doubted it, or have you always had a really strong compass?
No, for sure, I doubt it. And you go harebrained, and go, what am I doing? And you know that happens. Some things just don't work out, and you just put it in the bin. Or sometimes they do go out, and you go. But generally, I feel like innately I know when something's working or it isn't, and when to remove it. Yeah.
Do you love every piece you put out into the world?
Yes, yeah, I do. Yeah. Well, they're all handmade, and they've all got a little piece of me in them. I like it because it comes from my brain to my hand and then out, and there's really no one in between. It's creating from nothing, and you don't need to work with a big team. Although I've had a really great assistance over the years as well, particularly for the bigger department store orders. Yeah.
There's so much to be said for that. Almost a rare craft. Is handmade millinery becoming that a rare craft?
I think it definitely is, and in Australia it's really unique in its industry, even though we have a tiny population, which makes it problematic to make millinery a career. Hence, I have also career in art as well. I've lost track. Australian has an amazing millinery scene despite the small population. It's really encouraged. They have a great Millinery of Australia association, and with the racing clubs, whatever you think of racing, I've always been supportive of the whole fashion and the whole sector. The Victoria Racing Club and the Australian Turf Club, and even the smaller ones support it. Yeah.
What's your advice for maybe people considering a career shift or a career out of school in millinery?
I would say go for it. I would say, like a lot of creative careers, have something there keeping you going at the side. I'd think about, scaling and working, well, internationally, or manufacturing and doing larger production. It's possible. But, if you're working in Australia, it is a small market, and there's less money to spend on an expensive bespoke hat. So, people do go for the smaller commercially made ones. Yeah. So it's a difficult industry, but every milliner I know is completely passionate about it, and really probably doesn't know why they're doing it. But yeah, it's a love of creating form and making someone look fabulous.
When you're designing not for, I guess, commercial sale or functional wear, when you're designing for the catwalk, the runway, for the perhaps once-off fashion collections, how does your process differ?
It's usually working closely with the designer about what their look and feel is, and then working out what materials, the fabrication, what is going to be feasible if somebody's moving, and how you do that. It's feeding into each other.
Do you get to explore crazy things for the catwalk and runway? Because most of us who are observers or consumers of fashion say that what's on the runway is never something you're going to wear in the real world.
I'd say my hats are usually, they've sort of got a streamlined, more simplistic look to them, and that's the style that I sort of work with. And I think when people come to me, they're looking for a certain thing, and then there are other milliners that they can go to for the skill across, larger scale works. Yeah.
I love that. Do you have a favorite material?
Look, I really used to like working with feathers. You can do so much with them. You can tear them apart, you can steam them, you can chop them. But I guess I think about, the origins of them, and trying to start working with, more straws and other materials that aren't using feathers and things. One of my early collections was having a lot of fun with feathers, and I had lots of orders for it, but then the bird flu hit, and that was really difficult.
Right.
But the feathers I have really enjoyed working with in the past.
And is the sourcing of them problematic, that they're not found, or?
I don't, so I have worked with bulk bought feathers, because you can get amazing shapes and colors and textures. And also when I'm working in multiples and doing a design for a collection and then there's orders, it just keeps it all consistent. So I haven't really worked with bound feathers at all, because I sort of haven't, work less one-off. It's been more bulk collections.
Thank you for bringing us into your world of millinery. It's really not something most of us ever get access to, and definitely encountered through museums or collections, or maybe for those who are into horse racing at the spring racing carnival. Really, that rare moment, and you forget that people actually do that. People design it. There are amazing creatives such as yourself who are milliners, who are exploring that form all the time, looking for that effectively miniature architectural outcome.
Yeah.
Have
Well,
you ever?
you think, oh yeah, you go.
No, please go for it.
Well, you think like, I mean, hats are actually everywhere when you think about it. Like every guy has a baseball hat on, every kind of, a lot of those service industries, they're all wearing hats, and yeah, you forget they're a huge part of life. And then there's all the milliners working in theatre and ballet and opera, and yeah, doing incredible creations that do stay on the head as somebody flies across the stage.
So much to consider in those elements as well. How do you affix it? I wonder, is there something you wish the rest of us knew about millinery?
That it's a labor of love, that it's incredibly slow process most of the time. There's a lot involved in, like a simple, somebody wants a straw boater hat made by a milliner. The milliner has the wooden hat blocks. You need to get the straw, then that straw comes in a set shape, and that has to be manipulated and steamed, and it's quite a hard material it takes a lot to make it pliable. Then that has to be stretched over the blocks and cut the crown section and then the brim away, and it's all largely hand stitching all of that together. Then there's the lining hand stitching, then there's the trim and the edge, and it takes hours really for a simple hat. And I don't think people realize that today, how much work goes into it.
But then
One that's made by a bespoke milliner, yeah.
But then you have a piece that lasts forever.
It lasts forever. It does last forever, but also it is, in a very, very long time, I guess, biodegradable as well, which is even better. Yeah, even the feathers, wherever they come from.
I wonder, what did you learn in the fine art world and in the art world and your experience in art that has given you the fortitude to pursue something that's in many ways becomes a labor of love?
I think it comes back to the narrative we talked about earlier with you. I like the storytelling in art, and that you can see a work and find your own way. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it isn't. And I think that's why with the collections that I created, it's a loose story, but it takes someone beyond it just being a hat. I mean, often they do just buy it and they wear it as a hat, but maybe it's a work of the newspaper, the Mono Daily collection, and the newspaper hat. And that was about, I created that when iPads and iPhones were really coming to the fore, and people were reading their news on that. And it happened quite quickly and recently. And people stopped, I stopped getting my daily delivery of a newspaper. So just putting a twist into the headwear and making it playful.
I love that. But it also imbues so much more meaning. And that's exactly how we work in architecture as well. We look for those stories and those narratives, and we try and bring it into our work and our practice to enrich it, to enrich all the stories that are coming together in the work you're trying to make.
Yeah. And that's true with architecture, because maybe you go into that building your whole life and you don't realize, but then on the last day you walk in there, you go, that's why. That's why. Yeah.
Or that was that together. Moment. Or that reminds me of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is also such a nice moment. I love that about the newspapers. What's another narrative that is perhaps more legible in some of your pieces?
In some of those collections.
Mm.
Well, the Tokyo collection was just straight, from, enjoying my travels through work in Japan and just taking elements of that culture and throwing them together into something fun into a hat. So there was a piece called Calligraphy, and I think that's one in the National Gallery at the moment, which is a swirl of sort of lycra on the top of the head, and it's sort of to mimic the line of the calligraphy line, and then the playfulness of the geisha headwear butted up against it, so it's got yellow fringing there. So that was more literal and straightforward.
I love that. I love that journey. Let's pivot back to your work in the art space, and something you're also really passionate about, as we are in this program, is about accessibility of communication.
Yeah. Well, I've worked in art a really long time in some really interesting institutions, and for me, so I'm not a curator. I work at the other side. I know my background has been at Melbourne Art Fair, where it was everything: marketing, development. Working with the director and board. But it was really enjoying bringing audiences to that art. The way my mum took me to the gallery, and I got to enjoy it. So, yeah.
That public programs and public activation is almost compulsory now, isn't it, in parallel to any show?
It is. Although I also it's just really joyful when somebody just walks into the gallery and go, oh, I didn't know about this. Wow. I mean, that's almost better than a public program, just getting it out there that to just come in and visit. Yeah.
Say something about how important it is to have these third spaces, these other places that we can come to that's outside the home, outside the workplace, and often can either be free entry or low cost entry with no expectation to spend further money.
Yeah, that's it. I think for the, where I'm currently working at Mossman Art Gallery, it's, a lot of the community are older, and it's a second home for many, and it's a meeting place, and it's a learning place, and it's a safe place. And when I worked at Art Space in Woolloomooloo, they used to get a lot of teens skating by and just dropping in. There'd be this great video work in a dark room with beanbags and chairs out, and they just hang there for a while. So they're great places that our community can offer.
Also, one of the few places where it's encouraged to move slowly, to sit, to wait, to contemplate, to not rush on. Anywhere else would be considered loitering behaviour, right?
Yeah, that's right. Even when
So many great galleries in Sydney and, of course, across Australia. Do you have a favourite? Are you allowed to tell us?
Oh, definitely. The NGV. Roy Grounds NGV International is incredible. Yeah.
Largest
I worked there. It was my first job out of university, and we were security guards, which is unbelievable. So there's a lot of artists and musicians. They don't do that anymore. They're all contractors. But it was great. You got to sit in a room with these masters for hours on end. A lot of us did a lot of drawing and sketching of the work.
Sneaky drawing.
Someone wrote a hit music song in there. But that building, and that was before, I think what they've done with their, what do you call it? It's not a renovation, rejigging, is incredible. But even before then, I really liked the spaces, the warm wood walls, and this jewel inside this fierce exterior.
And the largest stained glass ceiling in the southern hemisphere as well. And
That's right.
I'll note that really big void, because you come in and you get this enormous, stunning atrium space.
That's true. That's true. We have our own incredible space like that. Yeah.
I'm interested in how you picked up on that being your favorite as these explorations that you return to. Do you look for creating voids in your millinery as well?
Actually, yes, quite a few of them do. Yeah, because you can get the shadow falling from different shapes against fabric. Yeah, I do. I definitely do that. Yeah.
And I guess you get the opportunity of both the space that you can leave inside the hat, as well as one kind of intersecting, or the external space that the hat takes up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that, yes, the void inside the hat is critical because it has to fit the head. Yeah.
Often these first threads of the idea, the first memory of a building or place, and why I love to ask my guests that question, is that reveals their trajectory in work and in practice. And that's for most people. I find that's very common. Usually that revelation comes a lot sooner. I'm loving that it's in the second half of our conversation now that that's actually come through, and we've unpacked and found how pivotal that void and that negative space has been in your process. I'll ask then, I guess, one more architectural question. Do you find that your work is additive, where you're adding shape and volume and form until you're getting a creation that you like? Or are you perhaps more of a subtractive designer, where you're revealing the hat?
That's really good. Probably both, actually. And I add it, but I actually think I'm thinking more about subtracting, because a lot of my designs are more pared back. There's not a huge amount of color play in one hat. It's sort of quite one color or two. Yeah, so I think I am always naturally thinking of subtracting.
We're back to Renaissance Italy then, like Michelangelo.
Although that was the opposite. So.
Well, they were revealing the sculptures.
Oh, they
from
were
Marvel.
Relief works. So yeah.
pushing through. I love that. Well, then, if your work is subtractive and you're trying to find that purer form, or that form that you're happy with, where you're like, this is it, this is the design moment, what are you beginning with? How do you understand your starting point?
I don't know.
For me, when I'm designing architecture, I also work in a subtractive way, and I generate as much complexity as I can from stories, from ideas, from narratives, geology, line work. Try and make it as dense and as complicated as possible, and then start carving away and revealing to strike that balance. I'm just wondering what your starting point is.
A starting point, well, I'll just be really literal. When I'm sketching, it's usually pretty sparse to begin with, and then some designs might be more complex, but it's just an innate feeling of balance and paring it back from that.
More of your keen eye and your aesthetic sensibility coming through.
Yeah, it's just like that.
I hope this conversation is very inspiring for listeners for the next generation, because your belief in your own creative potential and your creative eye has steered you in the most fabulous direction, the most exciting direction. And we'll definitely share some pieces of some of your work on Instagram for the follow-up post. Back to our continued conversation about public engagement and accessibility of ideas, you've also done a bit of work with Bosman High School, who have been really excited about your appearance in our conversation this evening.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
So my two sons, one is at Mosman High and one just finished. And so, look, I was fortunate to move to this area and have access to this amazing public school that has pretty outstanding reputation across visual art, drama, music. And so when my first son began there in Year 7 a long time ago, I joined the Parent Art Committee just to contribute what I could. And that's been the relationship. I'm no longer on the committee because they've got, the next generation coming through. That they do a lot of fundraising campaigns, and their initiatives and fundraising have supported, the visual arts students doing residencies at Bundanong, Arthur Boyd's property down there. And I think next year they're going to Paris. But again, that's a group of really interesting, creative parents, and they're just passionate about it. And also the teaching staff go above and beyond.
Amazing. Do you think there's a steady stream of this next generation coming through? I mean, wanting to be an artist is almost always popular, but coming through and wanting to be milliners.
Hang on, what was the question? Sorry.
I'm wondering about the future of millinery and whether there's a steady stream of the next generation of these students coming up.
I think there's always going to be, an enthusiastic, creative generation that are going to test, each creative endeavor. So millinery, it's really tough, but someone will come, a group will come through and keep moving forward. There will be audiences. I mean, in Australia it is small, but I'm optimistic that there's always that creative pool that will do that. And I think today it's people have such great opportunity. I don't think university is amazing, but there's so much you can achieve beyond that today.
Do you have any forecasts for us in terms of hatwear and where you see hatwear and headwear going?
Hatwear is never going to go away. It's, I think it's more prominent today, like even in magazines and editorial and overseas. But I think, out of necessity, wearing a sun hat for a skin or a cap or, I think it's got a good future. It might have shifted a little since, when those milliners like Lily Dasher and all the others in Australia from the 30s and 40s, they're amazing female women milliners with huge businesses. I think that is slightly different today, but there'll be other opportunities come up.
Do you subscribe to trends when you design? Or do you think about it at all, or do you just ignore it and create the collection that feels right for you?
You do. It's in the either. I try not to, but you're looking at things and it's really weird. Some things come up that you're designing a collection, something. You design it and then you put it out there and then you see someone somewhere else on the other side of the world. But I think it's all in a pool, and I think it's all seeping through social media. Like I think, they have those trend forecasters saying red is this year, and it's everywhere. And it just comes into your, subconscious. And I think it comes out. But, designing for commercial brands, you have to sort of look at what is in what's happening.
Tell me about millinery time, because architecture time, it takes 2 to 3 to 4 years to bring a building into existence at least. How long?
Well, thankfully, millinery doesn't take that long. But with collections, designing for those, you will generally, let's say Melbourne Cup in November, that's start point. And then from that date, you're doing your spring collection, and you'd show that to stores in February, March, and then was purchased March, April. Then you're in production April, May, and then it's in the stores September, October. So it is sort of over a year, but the actual making is a lot less than an architect building. Yeah.
I spoke to a screenwriter a few weeks ago, that said to me that architecture time was incredibly fast compared to filmmaking time. So I am interested now in cross-checking across.
It definitely is. Their timeline expands beyond 10 years, I think.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Who else? You mentioned Louise McDonald, but who else has been a really big mentor for you in your career?
In my career, I'd say like across in Melbourne, I learned a lot from Bronwyn Johnson, who was the director of Melbourne Art Fair. She achieved amazing things with that organisation, and it really benefited from working with her and being younger and observing. Also, it was a small team to begin with. It was myself, and then Bronwyn as director, and then you're working to a board. So it's a tiny organisation, so you have to do many things. So I think you gain a lot of skills from that, and that's advice I'd give to a younger generation as well. Is I think you can learn so much from on-the-job experience. I've volunteered at a lot of galleries, at RMIT, at Ian Potter, I think the Geelong Art Gallery when I was really young, and it was just learning from these people, and then you can apply it. Yeah.
What's been your biggest lesson so far?
Biggest lesson is time management.
Time.
Can you hear me still?
Yeah, we've got you. Yeah. We've got you. You're on.
I'd say time. I've been a single mum, brought up 2 kids, working several jobs, loving all of them, and how to manage time and carve out time for yourself.
What's your secret trick? What's your superpower?
The superpower is a hard morning, a good night's sleep.
Getting those basics and fundamentals right. Well, I see we might have a bit of tech issues happening on the call, so I'll ask my last question, and that's, what gives you hope?
The next generation give me hope. Like, the media is full of a lot of negative things, and these things are happening. But speaking to my kids and others, they're interested in their own future and making things better as well. So that drive will continue.
Hear. Thank you so much for joining me on the program tonight, Anne.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karam studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
It's Henry Wagons here, and you must not switch the dial from Radio Karam. You're about to hear something that will change your life forever.